In August 2016, Toho announced that an animated Godzilla film was being developed, targeted for a 2017 release. Polygon Pictures was announced as the studio that would animate the film. In March 2017, Toho announced that the film would be the first film in a new trilogy, in Koban Shizuno and Hiroyuki Shishida's Godzilla, Planet of the Monsters.
Let them fight.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll be back.
Death has come to your little town, June.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Chills and Thrills. My name is Connor Dunham. I am here along with Chris, and today we are continuing the Godzilla franchise. We are looking at Godzilla, Planet of the Monsters to begin this episode. And with this episode, we are actually going to be going over the entire Netflix anime trilogy, which includes Godzilla, Planet of the Monsters, Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle, and then in the big fiery conclusion of the trilogy, Godzilla the Planet Eater. So we will be going over all three of those in this episode today. And I have talked with Chris about this a little bit. I've only seen these films twice each. So I've never really been an anime fan, so I have a tough watch with these. And my first watch of this film, I actually liked it. My second watch, I liked it as well. There's not a whole lot that I can say about it, as I've only seen the film twice. All the other Godzilla movies I've seen 20, 30, 40 times each, if not more, So I'd probably have to give these movies a couple more viewings in the future to truly have a lot to say about them. But I mean, it's not a terrible start to the trilogy in all, but I'm just not the biggest fan of anime. I know Chris seen these before these, so what are your little opening thoughts?
Yeah, to counter that, I am a pretty big anime fan. I'm not the most I'm not like an insane level. I don't watch anime all the time, and I don't have like 1,000 shows and movies that I've watched, but I am quite a fan of my fair share of anime, but I also did not really dig these movies and kind of struggle with them a little bit, and I find myself trying to do the thing of like finding things to kind of defend about them or finding things to kind of enjoy, and it's one of those situations where if these weren't Godzilla movies, I probably wouldn't really have anything to love about them. There's really good concepts. There's a lot of interesting ideas on paper. The execution isn't the best, and we can get into that as we'll have a longer discussion, but just to present the other side of it, you're not as much of an anime fan. I'm definitely an anime fan, and neither of us really love these movies all that much.
And I don't think it's in for I've seen animated Kong films as well, and even those it's not truly anime, it's just animated, but
Yeah.
those I'm not the biggest fan of either. I like my live action, and I feel like it's hard to make animated. Like if you were going to make an animated Halloween film or something like that, people just aren't going to get into that. I'm not
Yeah,
sure if that's the whole reason why, but it's just
well,
hard.
I do agree that not every genre necessarily translates to animation or anime well, and these aren't traditional anime in the sense that most anime is 2D animated, drawn flat like a cartoon, and these are this 3D CGI animation style that's done in a way to try and imitate the more typical anime style. So that kind of robs some of the appeal of the usual anime, and they're certainly not executed in a way that a lot of like if you were to describe an action anime, something like a Dragon Ball, or something like something from the Gundam franchise, or something like that's a bit more sci-fi oriented, action oriented. These aren't really done in that style either, and that's kind of, you would think, oh, a Godzilla anime, it's going to be something, it's going to have epic monster fights and great music and power ups and beam struggles and all of that cool stuff that you expect from like action anime, and these don't really do any of that. So it feels almost like they didn't really embrace the medium that they were using.
Yeah, I'll get into some background on the film for you, a little information that I found. Godzilla Planet of the Monsters is a 2017 Japanese computer animated kaiju film directed by Koban Shizuno and Hiroyuki Shishida, produced by Toho Animation and Polygon Pictures in association with Netflix. It is the 32nd film in the Godzilla franchise, the 30th film produced by Toho, and the first film in the franchise that was animated, and the second film in the franchise's Reiwa era. This film was released theatrically in Japan on November 17th, 2017, and then was released worldwide on Netflix on January 17th, 2018. So that's a little background on the film for you.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because it seemed like this was announced quickly or came out of nowhere after the success of Shin Godzilla, and especially, and I remember all of the hype and excitement I had when they announced a trilogy. I was like, oh man, we're gonna get like a standalone Godzilla trilogy. Like this could be like something that rivals the Gamera trilogy from the 90s or something like that. I was, really hoping like, oh, they're giving them like a 3-film story arc to tell. It could be something big and epic and amazing. And like I said, it just kind of ended up being something that was a lot better on paper than it was in execution.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get into a trailer for the film and then plot synopsis on this one, and we will continue with some fun facts and whatnot on Godzilla Planet of the Monsters.
ゴジラは無敵ではない。戦いを諦めた人類にこそ非があった。終わらせてやる！花先輩！ゴジラ怪獣惑星。
Captain Haruo Sakaki bears a seething hatred towards Godzilla, which killed his parents during the exodus from Earth. He believes the planet selected for colonization, Tau-E, is uninhabitable, and tries to force the ship's committee to rescind the order to send the elderly, including his grandfather, to scout the planet. Haruo is arrested and then witnesses the exploratory shuttle explode while entering the planet's atmosphere. He then anonymously publishes a classified essay on Godzilla's weak points provided by the exit priest named Metphes. This sways public opinion among the population, forcing the Central Committee into returning to Earth after deciding that they are unlikely to find another habitable planet. The Eratrum arrives on Earth's orbit and sends reconnaissance drones to scout the surface, which reveal that Godzilla is still alive. Metphes arranges Haruo's bail, and he explains to the committee that Godzilla has a vulnerability. It is an electromagnetic pulse-producing organ in its body which generates an asymmetrical permeable shield, making it impervious to all damage, except for a short period when the organ recycles. Haruo proposes using that window to crack the shield organ and quickly implant an EMP probe into Godzilla to cause an implosion, from the resulting energy buildup. He stresses that close quarters combat would be needed for accurately coordinated attacks in order to find the organ and request a force of 600 people to implement the plan. When Haruo and the two battalions reach Earth's surface, they learn that almost 20,000 years have elapsed due to relativistic effects. Also, Godzilla's presence on the planet has radically altered Earth's biosphere. They suffer losses and damage to their landing ships by flying creatures called servums. The remaining troops mobilize and soon encounter Godzilla. Haruo proceeds with the original plan on his own and attacks Godzilla before Leland intervenes and provokes Godzilla. His death allowing the others to learn Godzilla's weak point is in its dorsal fins. Command falls to Metphes, who promotes Haruo to commander as the human convinces the remaining survivors to continue with the plan and defeat Godzilla. The group manage to trap Godzilla within a collapsed mountain pass, where they succeed in killing the monster. However, it appears to only be an offspring, and the original Godzilla, which has grown to 300 meters in height, emerges from beneath a nearby mountain and destroys most of the remaining crew. Trapped beneath rubble, Haruo watches Godzilla leave while vowing to kill it before losing consciousness. In a post-credits scene, Haruo wakes up in a secluded area and sees an indigenous girl standing next to him. Alright, I'll get into some fun facts for you here quick. Toho originally conceived Godzilla Planet of the Monsters and its sequels as a 13-episode television series.
That's actually, you know what's funny? I never actually heard that was a confirmed idea, because when you watch this trilogy, it honestly does feel like it was going to be a 13 episode series or something like that. And then Shin Godzilla made a lot of money, and they were like, ooh, we should just make these theatrical movies and make some of that theater money. And then you end up with 3 movies that are kind of weirdly paced and structured. And then, from what I understand, they did not perform very well in theaters in Japan. So, perhaps, it almost makes me wish that that they would have just kept it as a series, as a limited series or something.
Yeah, I know. I heard about them not performing well and then being released to Netflix, and I don't think that they've done very well on Netflix either. And I'm surprised that currently, as we sit, they're still on Netflix, and that's the only way that I know that we can watch them.
Yeah, when Netflix acquired the rights everywhere outside of Japan, these are sort of purchased by Netflix in a way where they're now like legally Netflix originals. Netflix did not make these, but after Toho made them, Netflix secured all of the international rights. So in the same way that Stranger Things will never leave Netflix, Netflix has these 3 Godzilla animes forever. And while they probably aren't performing terribly well, it's sort of one of those things of like, well, why would Netflix remove it when they've paid to have it? So it's like they're just gonna sit there on Netflix, and it would take someone else licensing it to do like a North American Blu-ray release or anything like that. For now, they're just kind of destined, like all of the other Netflix originals, to just exist on Netflix.
Godzilla Planet of the Monsters is the first fully animated Godzilla film. Henry G. Saperstein planned to produce an animated Godzilla film in 1988, but it was never made.
I think that would have been interesting, that would have been an interesting, like you think of an 80s animated movie like Land Before Time or something like that, or The Secret of Nim or whatever, and you think about like, oh man, like that sort of vein of a Godzilla animated movie back then could have been something really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we've got like the animated like cartoon shows and whatnot that came from like the 98 film, and there was a couple before that. But I mean, to have a fully animated Godzilla film that runs, an hour and a half long, that's a little different than watching a couple episodes that are 22 minutes long each.
Exactly.
Godzilla Planet of the Monsters is the first Godzilla film to include a post-credits scene since Godzilla Tokyo SOS. Godzilla Planet of the Monsters also marks the first occurrence in the franchise of 2 solo movies being released one after the other. This movie and Shin Godzilla both featured the character not fighting any other monsters.
which is interesting. And you would think with a movie called Godzilla Planet of the Monsters, in general, I expected more monsters, and I certainly would have liked to see some monster fighting monster action.
Yeah, I didn't watch the trailers for any of these anime films, and so when you come into the name Planet of the Monsters, I thought it was kind of going to be like a destroy all monsters like intro where they're just wrecking hell, they're creating hell all over, and the second film, City on the Edge of Battle is kind of like them rebuilding the city and all that stuff while battles are still happening like on the outskirts or something. I don't know. I wasn't thinking what was actually going to be on film. Like I was way off on my like
Yeah,
thoughts.
uh, agreed. When you hear a title like Planet of the Monsters, you're like, oh, so it's like, whereas in the old classic movies we had Monster Island, this is going to be a monster planet. And I thought we were just going to have, in the same way that you had Monster Island populated by all of the classic, iconic, vintage Toho monsters, I was like, oh, I can only imagine that on a planetary scale. And so, I was fantasizing about things like, oh, what about like flocks of Rodan, or like a herd of Anguirus or something like that. I was thinking like big scale, and that's not what we got.
And that I think you need to make your own anime film because that would have been phenomenal. Gareth Edwards, director of Legendary Pictures' Godzilla from 2014, was complimentary of the film, saying that the two of his favorite things from Japan, Godzilla and anime, had finally become one in an animated film boasting an outstanding visual presentation. He added that the film was a breathtakingly wonderful animation, presenting Godzilla in a way he had never seen before.
Yeah, sure, give it whatever credit it deserves for being unique. I would say the same thing again, just in concept. I'm like, oh man, I like anime. I like Godzilla. Godzilla anime should be absolutely awesome. And then you see it, and it's like, yes, it is visually dynamic. It has a lot of that, like, oh, almost every frame could be like a cool wallpaper image or something like that. And it's unique, but unique is not always necessarily the coolest or most entertaining or greatest thing ever. And I think, not to over hate on it, but it's like it just feels a little undercooked as a concept. So hats off to him for trying.
Yeah, I think it could have been a really good concept here. I think I don't know if it might have been money that they fell short on or what, but the films, they fall a little short. They're a little lackluster, but I mean, I again will appreciate them for being Godzilla films as we are big fans.
Yeah, and the I don't know if it was the director or sort of the creative lead, but someone who is essentially calling the shots on this anime trilogy. I think it's the director. He also directed the Gamera Rebirth anime on Netflix, which has the same kind of CGI anime style that no one really loves, but it's far cheaper animation than what these movies have. But he came out and said that creatively he wasn't really able to do things the way he wanted for the Godzilla anime trilogy, and that with Gamera Rebirth he was able to do it more like he wanted. And I will say that the Gamera Rebirth anime series on Netflix, 6 episodes, and it's fantastic. Every episode feels like a miniature Showa kaiju movie. It's got well written and interesting kind of characters with a good dynamic, but every episode plays out like a vintage kaiju movie, or like a vintage Godzilla movie, where the bad monster shows up, does its stuff, Gamera shows up, kind of has a battle with it, and then they kind of have to have a rematch where Gamera wins, and it's essentially versions of that for like 6 episodes, and it's just so much fun and so good to watch. It's like this is exactly the kind of sort of action oriented anime that I wish that this Godzilla trilogy had been, and it just wasn't, and it's such a shame. So it's like I'm tempted to not blame the director, and he kind of in so nice of a way was putting the blame more on Toho. And I feel that because some people said that after Shin Godzilla was very successful, that Toho kind of mandated that the sort of emotionless, very still, not moving a lot kind of Godzilla style of that movie, that they kind of forced this anime trilogy to kind of have a Godzilla that was characterized a bit more like that. Sort of like still not very responsive, not very emotive, not really moving fast or engaging in battles, just kind of this immovable object kind of a thing, this lumbering creature. And so it does seem like maybe Toho had some weird mandates and decisions on how they forced them to do this anime trilogy, because you look at the Gamer anime and it has all of the things you wanted from this trilogy. So who knows?
It's always somebody that's ruining a director's perspective. That I don't know if I could have ever been a director, because I would, you'd have one way that you want to do a film. You got a one vision, and they're like, well, nope, we're gonna do it this way and add this and take out this, and it's like, well, I don't even want to direct the damn thing anymore.
Yeah, the temptation to come out and just say like, you all can go to hell because you don't have good ideas. It's tough. You sign a contract, you sign an NDA, you sign a non-disparagement agreement. So then for the rest of your life, your name is on a bad movie because the studio executives don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. Oh well, I mean, like I said, for an anime film, I'll take it for what it is. Me not being the anime fan, I still like this first film, and once we get to talking more about them, I guess we'll see of the three, like what ones you and I like the least. What's our second and our third favorite out of the trilogy?
Hmm.
All right, I got two more fun facts for you, and then we can move on from that. This film is available dubbed into 7 different languages and with subtitles in 23 different languages. I thought that was very unique, because you usually don't see that even on Netflix or anything, special features that a film can be subtitled in 23 languages.
Yeah, Netflix's game as far as subtitling and dubbing movies for various international markets is pretty hardcore. They got a lot of money that they can throw at stuff. So it's, with animated stuff, they're pretty good at tailoring it to different markets.
Absolutely. And then my last one here for you is Takayuki Hattori composed the film's soundtrack, marking it his third Godzilla film score that he has done. And that is all the fun facts I have for you.
And I believe, off of memory, wasn't it Space Godzilla and Godzilla 2000?
Yes, you are absolutely correct. Those are the other 2 films he has done. And then he goes on to do the rest of this anime trilogy as well.
Yeah. And I will say that in my opinion, I think the scores for these movies are probably the biggest standouts, as far as something that I could just say like, yeah, the musical scores are very, very solid. He's got this way of, he can kind of, I don't know, he's got this, it's hard to describe the style. It's pretty, it's kind of dazzling and energetic, and I think it fits well with this kind of sci-fi type of story.
Well, since we're talking about it, do you want to go into your favorite score if you had one for the film?
Yeah, I mean, there's a long track called Godzilla that is like this sort of suite that has a pretty interesting Godzilla has a pretty interesting theme, this kind of da 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 da, and it really communicates the kind of size and scale of Godzilla, which is really good. But if I were to pick a one-off track, it's called Total War, plays near the end of the film, and it's just got this like intensity, and it just colors the action very well. So if I were to pick a one-off track from this movie that wasn't Godzilla's theme itself, I'd go with Total War.
All right, I think I'm going to agree with you on that. I didn't listen to the soundtrack on its own, but I did like kind of pay attention while I was watching the movie, and I did like that one. That was just one of the ones that it's hard for me to pick soundtracks when it's not like something I'm used to. Like I know Akira Ifukube is going to bring some bangers, so it's like I'm ready to listen to that soundtrack. And when I don't know what I'm getting into, it's kind of hard. But that one, Total War, sounds like this. I did have a favorite quote for this film, and I did not put down who the quote was from, so I would have to figure that out. But I did have a favorite quote, and it was, uh, "It's at times like this I find myself jealous of those who have a God to pray to," and that was, I believe, that was towards the end of the film, and that kind of just hit you hard. It's like he was not in a good situation. It was one of those things that a line like that just makes you, or at least makes me feel like the character is scared. He he thinks he might, lose his life, so he's kind of wants a God to pray to, like, here, like, get me out of this, get me through this. I may be looking too much into this or not enough into that, but that line in this film, I didn't find a lot of hard hitting lines, but that one kind of struck me like, damn, like he's probably like wishing he wasn't in this situation at the time.
Yeah, this trilogy overall, it has kind of this darker tone to it. It's sort of like Godzilla by way of like a dark sort of Star Trek anime style. It's not a very fun, entertaining, lighthearted type of anime. And so lines like that, like Japan can come sometimes get heavy with the melodrama. And so a line like that, it's like, yeah, it's like right up the alley of from what I understand, some of the work that this writer is known for, which is rather dark material. Uh, it is a great line, though. My line is a much is a much more simple line, and it's from a character named Leland, and it's this planet can go to hell, which is you know, which is about how you would feel after returning to Earth after so long, and then it's basically Godzilla's planet, and he's taken over the ecosystem. Like it's just that's kind of like a comedically blunt sort of line, and I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even think of that one. I'm glad you brought that up because that, as soon as I heard it in the film, it gave me a little laugh. So that's a good line as well.
Yep.
What was your favorite scene of the first film in the anime trilogy?
It has to be the scene where or sequence perhaps, where they have killed or believe they've killed Godzilla or they've killed a Godzilla, and then we find out that that was only some kind of offspring or something, and that the actual true real Godzilla is alive and well and significantly larger than the Godzilla that they just destroyed. And people have pointed out that they're like, like that kind of in a roundabout kind of way, like they killed Godzilla's son, and then Godzilla is on revenge for the rest of the trilogy. And it's like, ooh, it's crazy to think about it like that, like that like with that kind of dynamic.
Yeah, that's another thing I never thought about. I even watching the film twice, I just thought, okay, they killed another Godzilla, and now here comes the big boy, and that all in all is just a great kind of like little wrap up, or like beginning to the wrap up of this film. The scene that I chose was I call it was like the ending Godzilla battle where the military or JSDF, whatever, they're taking that smaller Godzilla out, and then like it rolls right into your scene where eventually we see that the Godzilla they did kill what wasn't the big boy, that there's some far greater force to be reckoned with on that planet. So I mean, like, our scenes kind of roll like one into one another. So
Yeah.
those are two great back to back scenes that I guess you could call roll into the ending of this film.
Hmm. Yeah, it takes a bit to get going and takes a bit to kind of arrive at some of the more spectacle aspect of the story. But when it gets there, it's fairly solid. It's fairly solid, and it's a very, these are the most sci-fi Godzilla movies that have been made in terms of taking place in the future and all this other stuff. So it's interesting. It's an interesting realm to explore.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really. I had fun with the film on my first and second watch, but I mean, it's probably like the last half hour or so, like you said, is where it really gets going. And the first hour is okay, I can live with it. But that last half hour, I can say that I actually did enjoy. Where
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think this one is just under 90 minutes, even with the credits, so it's not terribly long. It's not a very fast-paced movie, but it's this one alone. The first chapter alone is not a terribly long and not horribly paced, but you do get a bit of sense of like this was maybe meant to be multiple episodes of a TV show, and then they kind of like upgraded it to being a movie, and so it's not really structured in a way that really works best for that.
yeah, absolutely. So that's all we have for that. We will do an all-around favorite character for the trilogy for all three films. We'll wrap it all into one. But I do have some numbers for you on Godzilla: Planet of the Monsters. Godzilla: Planet of the Monsters debuted at third place at the Japanese box office with a $919,000 gross. Toho released Godzilla: Planet of the Monsters to only 158 theaters, so to have just under $1 million in 158 theaters for an anime film, I'm not the expert, but I would believe that's not terrible.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, again, it's weird because I don't know relativity in terms of just Japan. Like, I know they're like compared to the U.S., they're a small country. So, like in the U.S., a movie that gets a lot of theaters might get like 4 or 5 thousand, well, 4,000 plus locations. Japan is much smaller, but I'm not sure if just 120 theaters is a very large release for Japan either, though. I'd have to do some more research in terms of the scope and scale of the size of that release. But I do know that by all accounts, the performance of these films at the box office was pretty underwhelming and pretty not that great, even by anime standards. Like these weren't I think the box office performance of the three of them got worse as they went on. So the response was not terribly strong across the board for this trilogy in terms of the box office.
Yeah, and I mean that almost goes with how Godzilla films have done. Most of them have not done well at the box office. There's probably like 10 of them that have been like, all right, like we this is boomed at the theaters, like we need to make another one. The rest have kind of just made their money back.
Yeah, yeah. I think coming off of Shin Godzilla, there was maybe a hope and an expectation that the brand overall was much stronger instead of more of a, well, people really liked Shin Godzilla as a standalone film, and so just shotgunning out three kind of middle of the road anime movies was not really going to hit the same.
No, because Shin is far superior to these films. No offense to the director of
Definitely,
these films.
definitely, definitely.
uh, after the after its third weekend of release, this film had made about 342 million yen. Variety estimated that overall the film would finish at about $53 million, although the final total is not clear on what this film made. This is rated a 6 out of 10 on IMDb, 71% on Rotten Tomatoes. Godzilla is on screen for 8 minutes and 42 seconds, or roughly about 10% of the film, with his first appearance early on at around 6 minutes or about 7% into the film. So not bad numbers for his screen time. It's just it's an anime film, and for a lot of there's a lot of anime nerds around the world. There's a lot of Godzilla nerds around the world. You got two of them right here, but
Yeah.
I'm just not a huge fan of the films. I would watch them again, but they're a
Well,
tough
and
watch for me.
like I said, I would say I would never anyone who's like, oh, I'm not. Well, okay, it's hard to say. Like, it's like I suppose someone who isn't into anime or would never watch anime, like these are not films that are for like big time anime fans. In my experience, it's like I'm an overlap of a Godzilla fan and an anime fan, and I don't think these movies really deliver, and I'm in the market for both of those ideas. It's like this is not the kind of anime I'm into, and it's not really the kind of Godzilla that I'm into. So it's kind of like this split down the middle thing. It's like oh man, it's like I wanted something a bit more action oriented in terms of anime. Like you got to think like an anime movie about giant monsters, you would think that the monster battles would be amazing and that the visuals and the colors and the action would just take full advantage of the medium, and like they just didn't really do it, you know. So it's like, oh gosh, it's like I feel like it kind of gives Godzilla like I can't imagine people who are anime fans and this is their first Godzilla movie, or people who are Godzilla fans and this is their first anime. It's like I wouldn't recommend this as a first for either if you're in either camp, you know? And so it's like that's kind of frustrating because it's kind of that Godzilla 98 syndrome where it's like really like that's the first Hollywood Godzilla movie, like that's the one that everyone's going to watch and see as the first American Godzilla movie, and it's such a misrepresentation of the franchise. You know, this anime trilogy is not very well representing of what the Godzilla franchise is, and likewise, this is a Godzilla trilogy that is not really showing the best that anime has to offer by any stretch. So it's kind of frustrating as someone who's a fan of both.
Yeah, because when I heard it was going to be an anime film, the anime I know it's all action packed. It's like balls to the wall, like crazy, and this is kind of far from that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very unfortunate.
Yeah, these could have been like top notch, goofy, like over the top anime films, and like you said, I think from what the director had ideas of, I think they definitely held him back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this film was followed by Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle on May 18th, 2018. And after a quick break, we will be going right into that. As I said earlier, that we are doing one entire episode for this entire trilogy, Godzilla Planet of the Monsters, Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle. And then we will conclude with Godzilla the Planet Eater. So for now, Chris, thanks for joining me. Thanks anyone who's listening, and we will be back here shortly. All right, Chris and I are back, and we are heading into the second film of the anime trilogy. We are doing Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle. We are continuing with our anime trilogy, one long episode for all three movies. And City on the Edge of Battle was probably my least favorite of the trilogy, or it was the hardest for me to get through. It had some interesting concepts with the nanobot technology or the nanotechnology. Like that was a little on the crazy side. You've seen it before in other movies. I think the Terminator franchise did it a little later on, but this one was tough for me to get through. I'm not a big anime fan again, but I did watch it. I believe I did a second and third rewatch, and it was just as tough for me to get through it the second and third time as the first time. I still like the Godzilla Earth and stuff, but it's just something that kind of drags for me. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, and it's a shame because, like I said before, like these are not the three movies that I would that if someone says, "Hey, I'm not that big of an anime fan," these are not the three anime movies I would say, "Oh, watch these and it'll make you like anime." It's like no, these are pretty weak representations of what the best of anime has to offer by a stretch. I love anime and I love Godzilla, and these are hard movies. These are tough. Interesting concepts is kind of the name of the game for the whole trilogy. There's so many. There's things that are cool on paper, or neat on paper, or interesting, and they're just executed in a way that doesn't work. And like the nanometal is neat and stuff, and it's kind of like maybe a throwback to space titanium or something from the original Mechagodzilla, but they set up like they're going to do a new, interesting, cool nanometal Mechagodzilla, and then they just make it a city. And so it just kind of feels like this big bait and switch. And apparently, at least, there were two directors on this. Apparently one of the directors and the writer were kind of wanting it to become a sort of Mechagodzilla versus Godzilla battle at the end, but then there were people at Toho and there was a co-director of the film that were not interested in that. They didn't want monster battles, and like to them I say, like, go to hell, like that's stupid to not do it that way, and that's who won out. And so, okay, so it's just like a big, like, missed opportunity to do at least like a cool Mechagodzilla versus Godzilla anime battle, and they don't do it, and that's kind of like this whole trilogy is just interesting ideas, just not done in very cool and engaging ways. And that's just kind of the name of the game for all three of them. I don't want to be too hard on them, but at the same time, I can't be too positive about them.
No, compared to, we're used to watching other films like even some of the cheesier Showa era films like Son of Godzilla and stuff. Like I would watch them probably another 25 times before I came back to the anime trilogy. No offense to, they tried something different. It's just not my cup of tea.
Yeah, and here's what I have to say is a big part of it is this anime trilogy is basically one big long 3-part movie. Like it's one long plot. So like the setup for all 3 movies is in the first, and then you slowly like unfold one giant story across basically a 4.5-hour movie. So it's one unit. You can't like judge each of the 3 individually. It's not like 3 one-off Godzilla movies. Like even the movies that are sequels to each other, like the Heisei films or something, those are still like individual movies. These are not. They're completely linked as a 3-parter. And so to be a 4.5-hour 3-parter movie, that's basically the longest piece of Godzilla media or cinema that there is, So to be the longest and to be kind of this low in quality, it kind of makes it the worst experience. If you sit down and watch Son of Godzilla, that's like an 80-minute movie, and it's at least like fun and charming and very 60s and kind of goofy and entertaining in that way. Like we've kind of talked about this before. It's like the Godzilla movies are either so good they're good, but then sometimes they're kind of like have elements of, well, this is at least like a little like corny or cheesy or outdated, but it's charming, so it's at least like entertaining. These are just kind of bland, and they're 4.5 hours long. Like that's longer than Zack Snyder's Justice League. That's longer than the extended edition of The Return of the King, and they are nowhere near that good to justify that length of time. So it's like it's the biggest time investment in the franchise, and it's kind of very not entertaining.
Yeah, do you want to watch this 4.5 hours, or do you want to watch the 2019 King of the Monsters back to back? Watch that twice.
I would watch. I mean, pick out any 3 of the lowest Showa films. Pick out the 3 that a lot of people say are the worst Showa films. I don't know, like, what people hate on maybe Sea Monster and All Monsters Attack, and a lot of people don't like Ghidorah or something like that. Like, give me any of those 3, and I would watch those 3 over these 3.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. I'll give you a little background on the film, and then we'll get into a trailer and a plot synopsis for it. Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle is an anime science fiction kaiju film directed by Koban Shizuno and Hiroyuki Shishida, and written by Gen Urabuchi, or Urabuchi. Produced by Toho and animated by Polygon Pictures, it is the second installment in a trilogy of animated Godzilla films and the 33rd Godzilla film overall, as well as the 3rd in the Reiwa era. It stars the voices of Mamoru Miyano, Takahiro Sakurai, Kano Hanazawa, Tomokazu Sugita, Yuki Kaji, Junichi Suwabe, Kenta Miyake, Reina Uede, and Ari Ozawa. And this film was released to Japanese theaters by Toho Visual Entertainment on May 18, 2018, and became available to stream worldwide on Netflix on July 18th. So there's just a little background on Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle. We will get into a trailer on the film, we'll get into a plot synopsis, and then I'll come back. I have just a couple fun facts and a couple numbers, and then we will go on with our episode.
Sweet. Sounds good.
Mecha Godzilla の力を。ガルチャー前期出撃。と言えるのか。知性ある者は迷う。
あれは
怒る。
先輩は
悲しむ。
私の希望だったんですよ。
俺たちがなすべきは人としてゴジラに打ち勝つことなんです。ナノメタルを信用していいんだろうか。これはまがまがしいものだ。ゴジラを前にしてやることは一つだ。今はお前たちを信じる。本当に見たのか。本当だ。森の中をすごい勢いで迫ってきたんだ。
手で炎に飲まれて消える。
最強の物質を手に入れたナノメタルだ。
皆今度の作戦に不安を感じている。
この歌を借り渡りガラスに問う。
我々はゴジラを倒すためにやってきたんだ。
挑む者、抗う者、すべて渡りガラスを空へ。これがバルチャー、ビルサンドの力。
我々人型種族こそがゴジラと呼ばれるに至らなくてはならん。
Following the events of Godzilla Planet of the Monsters, their Aratrum is unable to contact Haruo and the rest after their encounter with the original Godzilla. The captain orders the Aratrium's withdrawal if drones fail to find survivors within 48 hours. Haruo Sakaki is revealed to have been rescued by a native girl named Miyana, who treated his wound with a strange powder. Haruo reunites with some of his teammates while they were confronted by who they later learned to be Miyana's twin sister Meina, before being captured by the latter's hunting party. The group are reunited with Martin Lazari, whose platoon had been healed by the twins' people who are known as the Huotai, surviving descendants of humans who remained on Earth and safeguard the egg of their fallen deity. The group are telepathically questioned by the twins and the Huota leaders over why they burned their lands, letting them go once Haruo explains they were only attacking Godzilla. Accompanied by Miyana and Meina as their protective guides and observers, the twins revealing they can only speak verbally, Haruo's group reunites with Metphys and the other survivors during an encounter with the Servum. During the fight, Galugu realizes that the twins' arrowheads are laced with nanometal, the nanotechnology used to create Mechagodzilla. Galugu explains that the nanometal somehow survived and expanded itself over the past 20 millennia. Haruo is convinced by Galugu to remain on Earth and resume the plan to kill Godzilla, sending a few crew members back to the Aratrum. The group traced the energy signature to the rebuilt facility that held Mechagodzilla, which Galugu christens Mechagodzilla City. The twins part ways with the group while warning Haruo that the nanometal is poisonous, the Bilisuluto assuring the group that the technology is only harmful to Godzilla. The team soon finds that the surviving half of Mechagodzilla's head is the source of the nanometal as Galugu assesses Mechagodzilla's brain to construct all necessary materials to trap Godzilla within the city and cover it with nanometal, to finish it off with EMP harpoons. While overseeing the construction, her mech suit modified into one of the 3 Vulture exo-armors, Yuko confesses her feelings for Haruo and kisses him. Feeling slightly ill since entering the city, like some of the others, Haruo finds Metphys working in a cave to repair an item with some of the Galugu's technology. Metphys cryptically hints the Bilisuluto's motives of becoming monsters themselves due to their obsession with the logic, confiding to Haruo the name of the greater terror than Godzilla that destroyed his homeworld, King Ghidorah. As Godzilla awakens, most of the human members are horrified to learn that most of the Bilisuluto had willingly allowed themselves to be assimilated into Mechagodzilla's city to further fortify it. Godzilla's quick advance on the city forces Galugu to sacrifice the city's defenses in order to divert power to finish the harpoon, while Haruo, Yuko, and Belibu used the vultures to slow down Godzilla. Though the trio managed to hold Godzilla for the plan to go underway, Godzilla survives the trap and proceeds to overheat the facility. This forces the defiant Galagu to fuse with the nanometal as the humans escape the city. Galagu then has the vultures absorb their pilots to use as sacrificial spears to kill Godzilla. Haruo is unaffected while Yuko is being slowly converted against her will. Metphys warns a conflicted Haruo that Mechagodzilla City will consume Earth if not stopped and that its destruction could save Yuko. Galagu arguing that transcending their humanity is the only way to kill Godzilla. Haruo ultimately decides to fight Godzilla with his humanity intact, the destruction of Galagu and the command center rendering the nanometal inert as Godzilla frees itself and destroys the city. Haruo tends to Yuko, who is unable to wake from her comatose state, while the surviving humans hide in a cave with Metphys as everything burns around them. All right, how about we get into a couple fun facts? I got two here for you on this one. Haruo Sakaki and Yuko Tani's kiss in this film is only the second on-screen kiss in a Japanese Godzilla film, with the first being between Glenn and Namikawa in Invasion of Astro Monster.
That is an insane piece of trivia. That is wild. Like I almost want to be like, there's no way that's true. That's not possible. But I think you're 100% right, which is insane to think about.
When I seen that fun fact, or the fact when I was looking stuff up, I was like, and then I had to think about it, like, okay, like, and go through the movies in my head, like, is that really like?
Yeah, I at least appreciated it on a level of they're trying to have, this whole trilogy overall is pretty kind of cold, and there's not like a lot of emotion or charm or engagement with the characters. All of the characters are just kind of bland archetypes. And so for me, it was like they're at least trying to create some kind of emotional hook here. Like now there's at least two characters that are kind of romantically involved, like something with a little bit more meaning than like, oh, we're all just kind of working together or fighting together and on a mission, So it's like it was at least an attempt to like color the characters with a little bit more than just, oh, I hate Godzilla, or oh, we want to take the Earth back. But it just doesn't. I don't know. I mean, it works well enough, I suppose, but that's an interesting thing that it's the second time you've had a kiss.
Yeah, in 33 movies.
Yeah.
My only other fun fact I got for you is Japan's Reiwa era began on May 1st, 2019. However, Toho considers Shin Godzilla and the anime trilogy as part of that Reiwa era.
Yeah, in the same way that I think Return of Godzilla in terms of the years isn't technically part of the Heisei era, but it's included because it shares continuity. And the same reason that I personally would argue that the Millennium era really starts with Godzilla 98, because if it weren't for Godzilla 98, Toho would not have been triggered into making all of the Millennium movies that followed. So while the Toho Millennium era is obviously starts with Godzilla 2000, like in terms of the overall franchise, like I don't see how you don't have Godzilla 98 as like the pre-game of the Millennium era. But that's just me being, funky, I guess. But yeah.
Hey, I mean, I can agree with you because, like you said, if it wasn't for 98, we probably wouldn't have got 2000 or Godzilla Millennium.
Exactly. And people who don't agree with me are just dumb. Simple.
All right, I'll get into some quick numbers for you here on this one as well. Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle debuted at 8th place at the Japanese box office with an 80 million yen gross in 158 theaters. This figure was 22% lower than the opening weekend of the previous film in the trilogy, Godzilla Planet of the Monsters.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm pretty sure the numbers go down with each entry, and it's overall just because, like Godzilla 98 a little bit, this is kind of an example of this trilogy is like one of those like a wild reimagination of the characters and the concepts in a way that's so sort of foreign or so far removed from the typical presentation that it just kind of doesn't feel right anymore. Like in the same way that you can watch, if you watch, 10 or 15 Godzilla movies before 98 and then you watch 98, you're like, well, it doesn't really feel like a Godzilla movie in the traditional sense. these are also very sort of off-brand for the franchise. You have like the nods, like the Billa Saludo Mechagodzilla aliens are a nod to the 1974 aliens, like about being from like the third planet from the black hole or whatever that reference is. And the Exif are the aliens for King Ghidorah are clearly nods to the Planet X aliens that controlled King Ghidorah and the Exilians from Final Wars that have ties to King Ghidorah. Like you can see where the sort of reinterpretation of the old concepts is kind of feeding into these new movies, but it's so kind of removed in terms of the way they do it and just done in a not very engaging and not very fun way. And at least the 98 Godzilla movie is like a fun summer blockbuster type of tone. Like it's at least like a little silly and entertaining. These movies are just kind of dark and dour and not very charming or fun. They're just kind of like they're like a hard sci-fi Star Trek kind of a plot that cares more about all the sci-fi mumbo jumbo than it does about being a Godzilla movie. And so, and they don't have the charm or the fun that you might find in some Star Trek or like the heart of the characters. And so it's just kind of a lot of sci-fi stuff going on, not a lot of Godzilla stuff going on, and none of it's just not terribly satisfying, you know?
Nope, I agree with you 100%. And like you said, the numbers continue to go down, and there's not really a lot of help in these films when you don't put at least a decent amount of Godzilla in your anime, because Godzilla
And
Earth has a good design, so why not show
and
him
that could have been,
on
and it's
screen?
the largest Godzilla ever. And like I said, the concept of, oh, Godzilla's taken over the planet. Oh, a Mecha Godzilla that's made of nanometal. Oh, an interdimensional Ghidorah. Like these are concepts that like are kind of cool, and like they could be really interesting, and they could have some amazing battle sequences and action sequences. Like doing an anime sci-fi Godzilla movie could be so like that could go so hard. That could be so epic and dynamic and and riveting. And they just like it's like they tried to make the most bland version of it that they could sometimes. The whole thing feels like wasted potential, and I hate saying that, but it all feels like a lot of wasted potential.
Yeah, from what is on screen, and they could have done so much more with the Godzilla character and the Ghidorah in the third one and Mechagodzilla
Yep.
in this one, but
To make a point, I noted when a certain line of dialogue happened in this movie. It's over an hour into the movie, kind of just over an hour into the movie, and you get the line of dialogue, Godzilla has begun moving. And I realized like Godzilla does not become an active piece of this movie until over an hour into it. The first hour is all of this meeting the Hotuo, which are the little sort of like they're the reimagination of the Mothra fairies and the Infant Island society, and you meet them, and then you discover the nanometal, then you go to the city, then you introduce the nanometal concept and the like the merging with the nanometal and making the plans. Like this trilogy, I think I hear the term trap point more in these three movies than in any other movies ever combined. Like, so it's like all this stuff, and like you don't get Godzilla as an active participant in the plot until over an hour into a movie that's 100 minutes. So it's like, it's like, what are we doing here? It's like this movie is interested in everything but actually Godzilla. And when it gets to the Godzilla battle, it's engaging and cool and awesome enough, but it's like, why do you get one big sequence of this in a movie that's almost, that's an hour, over an hour and a half long?
yeah, and I'll get to one of the numbers here on that. It was given a 60% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 5.8 out of 10 on IMDb. IGN gave the film a 4.5 out of 5, which that blew me
Oh,
away.
IGN's retarded sometimes. Sorry for using the R word. I don't mean any offense. I just mean they're dumb.
I did not find a Google users rating for this one. So
Yeah, because the Google users know better.
here's the one we were getting at earlier. Godzilla is on screen for 5 minutes and 45 seconds, or just under 6% of the film. So we don't even have him for 6 minutes of an 100-minute film, which that's
rough.
rough.
And normally you get at least like about 10%. And I know people that doesn't sound like 6% versus 10%, but that is the world of difference. If you're talking about a 100-minute movie called Godzilla, like monster screen time is not everything, but damn, it is not nothing either. Like, at what point, like, how little Godzilla are you cool with having in a Godzilla movie? You know, is 3 minutes enough? Is 4 minutes enough? Like, at some point, like, there is a line there where it's not just like, you can't just ride the screen time isn't everything cart all the way. Then like, okay, hell, give us a Godzilla movie with no Godzilla in it. You know, where does the line get drawn? You know, so it's like, yeah, you needed some more Godzilla in your Godzilla movie. I'm sorry.
They absolutely did. This movie kills me. Like I said, this is my least favorite out of the trilogy.
Yeah, well, because it's the longest. It's the least paced. It's the least well paced. Most padding.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I'll go ahead and get into my favorite character for this one. My favorite character was the same in this one as it was in Planet of the Monsters, and it was Hiro Sakaki. And he is going to continue. He is my favorite character out of the entire trilogy.
Interesting. For me, I watching this trilogy go through, like, I actually find that the main character gets to be kind of hard to enjoy and like. He kind of gets to be like a little insufferable in some ways. I don't know. And so the character that I actually have as my favorite throughout the next two entries is actually the scientist Martin. He's a bit of like just the exposition guy. But throughout the three, he's sort of the most level-headed character. He's not sort of driven blindly by revenge, and he doesn't become like a religious zealot, and he doesn't become like the Mecha Godzilla cult or anything. He's kind of the most like level-headed throughout the three, and yeah, he's just explaining a lot of what's going on. But I don't know. He's the only guy that seems kind of like a normal, interesting member of the cast as far as the trilogy goes. So I actually like that character the most. I'll throw out a favorite score for this one. I'll just talk about it real quick. Yeah. So it's a little track called Saludo's Technology, and it's when they first fire up the Mechagodzilla city, and it's this very electronic vibe. And when I saw the movie the first time, I was convinced. I was like, I'm like, this movie's like getting a pulse now. This movie's finally kicking into high gear. We're going to see this like cool nano metal Mechagodzilla, and it's this really cool track that's very electronic. It sounds like it could be something like out of a Tron movie or something. I don't know. And it's a little misleading because like the movie kind of never gets as cool as that music would have you think it could be. It never gets that like that. It never really like stays with that vibe. But it's a really solid track that has a lot of energy, and it lands when you watch the movie.
That's a good track. I ended up going with one called Beginning to Run Away. And I don't know why that caught my attention. It's a little bit slower than yours. Yours, Saludo's Technology, is kind of like really fast, upbeat, and whatnot. And the one I chose is kind of it's still upbeat and got a really nice tone to it, but it's just a little more calm. And this is what that one sounds like. I enjoyed this one. I did have a favorite quote for this film, and it was, "What's the point of defeating it if we can't do it with our humanity intact?" And I just thought that was a nice little like, hey, like let it was almost like to me like, hey, let's do this the right way, and
Yeah.
that's the only way I took it, and I just like that line.
Yeah, I like it. The film has this interesting kind of, technology kind of concept to it of, losing your humanity and sort of becoming obsessed with technology and becoming these like hive mind nanometal beings, and it's an interesting kind of concept. Again, very compelling on paper, just not executed in a way that's terribly amazing. My favorite line of dialogue would be there's a line that Martin has when he's talking to Haruo somewhere in the midst of the movie where he says, Godzilla, Earth's current ecosystem is structured not only to sustain, but to solely benefit Godzilla. I surmise that the Earth has chosen as its lord of creation, not humanity, but Godzilla itself. And again, that's just a line that's cooler than anything in the movie is actually like executed or explored to be. The idea of a whole planet that's kind of been bent to Godzilla's will, so to speak, and that's interesting and compelling, and it just kind of implies something a bit more cooler than what we see. And also, I had to laugh at a line that's somewhere a little bit after that, where Haruo's kind of contemplating, and he just says, "I think I'm obsessed with Godzilla," and it's like, boy, you ain't kidding. It's like that's you're a one note character for the whole trilogy, and yes, you are obsessed with Godzilla.
Yeah, the line you chose, it's almost like how we used to say, Gigan is too good for the movie he originally appears in. That line is too good for the movie that it comes with.
Yeah, exactly.
My favorite scene for this film, I had two that I was kind of battling between, and they were neither one was like really a crazy scene or anything, but anything that had Godzilla Earth battling like the military or anything like that.
Hmm.
And then the ending scene where like the nano metal like kind of like takes over one of the characters and like is like just engulfing his body in the nano metal. Like that was just kind of like a cringy like as a little kid that might give you a little scare or whatever, give you bad
Yeah,
nightmares. But I thought it was a very cool like scene and like the way it was animated.
yeah, I like the final battle, and I will give credit, like when it gets to that sort of climactic moment where the nanometal's starting to kind of take over the characters against their will, and there's kind of all of this pressure of with Haruo, like, is he gonna let the nanometal take over? He's trying to save Yuko. He wants to destroy Godzilla, but then he wants to, turn on the city and destroy the nanometal to stop it, and it's like this great conflict. I will say that it does build to a very intense sort of, it builds to an emotional character choice, maybe for like once in this whole series where like you just feel the angst and the sort of struggle of Haruo. Like he wants to save Yuko, he wants to kill Godzilla. He doesn't agree with this nanometal thing. He doesn't want to betray his comrades, the Billis Saludo. Like it actually does reach a point where it's like, okay, this is like some high tension, and there's actually like some stakes going on here, and you're actually kind of invested in what's going on, and it's an intense moment. So it's like that's it, but it's like it takes the whole movie to kind of build up to that moment, and it's a nice little payoff, but again, just not, the that uh part, that sort of payoff isn't really justified by the whole movie that builds up to it. But it is a compelling scene in an otherwise not compelling movie.
This movie, for as bad as I think it is, or just not as bad, but just as a slow burner that I think it is,
Well,
it has a couple good scenes.
and it's tough when you have a trilogy where each movie feels like a slow burn. Like it's odd. You can tell that whole like, oh, it was going to be like a season of an anime or an anime miniseries, and then they just kind of stitched it and spliced it as three movies or something. Like it's not sort of paced and structured as three movies. It feels like, oh, this would have been like a 10 episode series with each episode being 20 minutes, and you just would have slowly progressed it, and every couple of episodes you would have had some kind of battle with Godzilla, and like it just, the structure of it might have worked a little better if it was like a series than three kind of big movies.
Yeah, absolutely. That is all I have for that on Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle.
Yeah,
I figure after we get into Godzilla the Planet Eater, we can go into the design of Godzilla and Godzilla Earth and
yeah, absolutely.
Ghidorah in the next film.
Yeah,
So that'll be a fun conversation.
the last small criticism I'll give of this movie is well, the trilogy overall all is that it falls into that sci-fi pitfall of just having like weird words. You know, they have words like garbatrium and gammatron and things like that, and they just sound like such like hokey sci-fi words. You know, the aliens, one of them are called the Saludo, and the other ones are called the Exif. It's like, to me, it's like, man, it's like, it just sounds like they just sound so undercooked. They just sound like weird sci-fi gobbledygook that they just decided to name things. Like, there doesn't seem to be a lot of like thought or whatever put into them, you know, and it just sounds like kind of mumbo jumbo. I don't know, and it's just kind of annoying. It's kind of tedious. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like we're going into some like Michael Bay, some different type of Transformers planets or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I don't know. You know, like bad sci-fi. You know, I don't know.
There was a sequel to Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle. As we said, this is a anime trilogy, and the sequel was Godzilla the Planet Eater, and that was released in Japan on November 9th, 2018, and we will be looking at that here in a couple minutes right after we get out of here on the City on the Edge of Battle.
Sounds good.
All right, Chris, Godzilla the Planet Eater. We are wrapping up the anime trilogy. What did you think of this one, the final film in the trilogy?
It's an improvement on the second one, and I mean, I like it because it at least brings this experience to a close. You know, I'm not trying to dump on it or anything. It's kind of it's got some ambitious and cool ideas, and there's, again, like all of them overall, there's things to like, and there's things that are cool on paper, and there's interesting ideas and interesting concepts, and a hard sci-fi Godzilla movie is always interesting, and again, interesting, and that sounds cool and that's neat, does not make an entire trilogy fun or cool or engaging or very satisfying. And this is also like the darkest of the three, and it's kind of like depressing in a lot of ways, and I'm just not sure that's the way to go. Like, it's just you know, it's just a very, very like depressing kind of a, you know, dark and depressing. You know, it's about this, you know, religious death cult that worships Ghidorah, and it's just very sort of dour, and so it's not, you know, it's not a very fun movie to watch. And when you have three movies that collectively are not very fun to watch, that, you know, oh, that's interesting, only carries you so far.
And we have heard Chris say, "Oh, that's interesting," quite a few times in the Godzilla franchise review.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's all right. I didn't mind this one. I liked that, Ghidorah was just like, it was weird. We're not used to seeing Ghidorah like it is in this film, and there's just a lot of things in this film that throw you off if you're a Godzilla fan. There's some things you're not used to, and I'll get into some of them in fun facts. But yeah, this film, it was kind of like you said, it's a little depressing. It's dark. It's just a weird way to end the trilogy, I guess I would say.
yeah. And in the same way that a nanometal Mechagodzilla is interesting and unique, a sort of interdimensional King Ghidorah is unique. It's kind of like one of the biggest and wildest interpretations of King Ghidorah, just as Godzilla Earth is the, you know, in a lot of ways, the most epic rendition of Godzilla, and then they do just very not epic things with him. So, you know, it's one of those things. It's like, wow, this is the biggest Godzilla, and it's in three of the sort of lamest Godzilla movies there are.
Maybe someday they'll get another something going and they'll get it right.
Yeah, yeah.
On Godzilla the Planet Eater, this is a 2018 Japanese computer animated kaiju film directed by Koban Shinzuno and Hiroyuki Shishida, produced and animated by Toho Animation and Polygon Pictures. In association with Netflix, it is the 34th film in the Godzilla franchise, the 32nd film produced by Toho, and the final film in the franchise's anime trilogy, and the fourth film in the franchise's Reiwa era. Godzilla the Planet Eater concludes the narrative of the anime trilogy, taking place after the events of Godzilla Planet of the Monsters and Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle, and the film follows the struggles of humanity, their extraterrestrial allies, and Godzilla as they battle to survive against King Ghidorah. Godzilla the Planet Eater was released theatrically in Japan on November 9th, 2018, and then was released worldwide on Netflix on January 9th, 2019. So these films came out very close to one another, and then their release dates were also on Netflix very close to one another. So, I mean, and it makes sense being a trilogy, but as a whole, like I said, I really liked the first one. I don't know what it was about the first one, Planet of the Monsters, and then City on the Edge of Battle kind of let me down, but the Planet Eater, this third one, it kind of brought me back to it a little bit. It wasn't as bad. So clearly, once we get to my rankings, you clearly know where I'm going to be with this. But I would have liked a stronger film to end the trilogy, but based off of the first two, I guess I could have guessed that we probably weren't going to get that.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like the most recent Disney Star Wars trilogy in a way where the first one kind of has a lot of promise and does enough interesting things, and I would say it probably has the most Godzilla or Godzillas in a sense. And it sort of seems like it's like, oh, like this could go somewhere cool and interesting and has potential. And then like the second one just feels like this total, like, you know, it's determined to not give you the things you want. Like it's sort of like, just as the second Disney Star Wars movie like promised you Luke Skywalker, and then you don't really get Luke Skywalker in the traditional sense. It promises you Mechagodzilla and then refuses to give you Mechagodzilla, and then it just kind of goes in all of these weird directions that are subverting expectations and not really giving you what you want. And then the third one is just kind of like tasked with bringing it all to a conclusion, and it's just kind of messy at that point. And it, you know, I would say this trilogy feels more planned out than the Disney Star Wars trilogy. This trilogy actually feels like it was telling the same story throughout all three. And the Disney Star Wars trilogy just feels like very messy throughout, like no one was in charge. But it's kind of that same thing where it's like, by the time you get to the end of the third one, you're like, who gives a crap anymore? You know, I don't know.
Well, why don't I get into a trailer on this one? We'll get into a plot synopsis on the film, and then I'll come back with the usual, some fun facts, some numbers, and we'll wrap up the trilogy.
Sounds good.
ゴジラにはもう勝てない。人間はゴジラという究極の生命を生むための前座に過ぎなかったのではないか。この星に神を招くなら君こそが祭壇に立つにふさわしい。
あなたは一体何を望むの？
悠久の時を超えて受け継ぐ我が使命が今まさに果たされんとしている。神だ！神ならゴジラを倒せる！神を称えよ。すべては献身の道へと続く。さあ、封じて拝むがいい。黄金の終焉を。ゴジラをゴジラたらしめるもの、それは君の憎しみなんだ。あれはゴジラどころの脅威じゃない。
ギドラ、
地球そのものが食い尽くされる。ゴジラだけでなくこの星もろとも全て滅ぼそうってのか。春を常に待ち望んできたはずだ。いつか全てから解放されるの。諦めれば全てが嘘になる。
命をつなぐ。
終焉をたたえよ。救いなどなくていい。これに勝る祝福はない。この時を待っていた。
Following the destruction of Mechagodzilla City, The remaining Bilisoluto and the Aratrum demand justice for Haruo destroying what they saw as necessary to defeat Godzilla. The humans disagree, believing Haruo exposed the Bilisoluto's true intentions of assimilating Earth. The Bilisoluto revolt and shut down the ship's engine room, forcing the ship to run on secondary batteries for the next 2 days. On Earth, Haruo learns from Dr. Martin that Yuko is rendered brain-dead with the nanometal in her body keeping her alive. He also learns that those treated by the Hota survived the nanometal's attempt to absorb them, with Metphys deceiving the survivors into believing their survival was divine intervention. When confronted by Haruo about converting the remaining humans, Metphys reveals his plan to bring the Exif's god to Earth and needs Haruo's help to make it happen. Dr. Martin advises Haruo to hide until tensions ease. Haruo is escorted to a remote camp by the Hota twins, Meina and Miana. Miana explains privately to Haruo that her people have no concept of hatred and that their concept of life revolves around winning or losing. She tells Haruo that he is losing and offers to connect life with him, but he turns her down. When Meina later extends the same offer, he realizes that it was she who had rescued him, not her sister Miana, and accepts. Miana discovers Metphys telepathically communicating with Endorf. The Exif reveal his plan before capturing her, as she telepathically contacts Haruo and Meina. Metphys later conducts a ritual with his followers in conjunction with Endorf to summon their god Ghidorah to defeat Godzilla. Ghidorah manifests as a shadow on Earth and partially through singularities, devouring Metphys' followers and destroying the Aratrum. Ghidorah then proceeds to attack Godzilla, who is helpless against the intangible monster as it bites Godzilla and drains his energy. Dr. Martin concludes that Ghidorah's true form exists in another plane of existence and is being guided by someone in their universe. Haruo, finding it to be Metphys, who had replaced his right eye with the amulet he repaired with the nanometal. Metphys proceeds to reveal that his people devoted themselves to Ghidorah since learning that their universe is finite and fated to destruction, having offered planets for the monster to feed on. Proceeding to telepathically assault Haruo, Metphys explains that the humans' hatred towards Godzilla made him an ideal offering and tells Haruo that he must submit himself to Ghidorah as its witness to enable its full manifestation. Meina and Dr. Martin use a Hotan's god egg to physically reach Haruo and reveal how to stop Ghidorah. Haruo, learning that Metphys orchestrated the deaths of the two Satei exploration parties so they could be saved. At the same time, Haruo recalls the charm he lost the day he fled from Earth as a boy. Its image of flowers reminds him of the meaning of his name, Spring, and the power of hope to overcome despair. Haruo then breaks free and cracks Metphys' amulet, causing Ghidorah to become affected by Earth's physics, and as such being ultimately defeated by Godzilla. Metphys dies, telling Haruo that Ghidorah will always be watching him as long as he lives. Time passes as survivors bury their weapons and integrate into Hota society, with Meina pregnant with Haruo's child. Dr. Martin tells Haruo that he got the last remaining vulture mech working, having discovered how to use Mechagodzilla's nanometal in Yuko's body as a tool to rebuild civilization as it was. Haruo's right eye stings, hearing Metphys' voice that this turn of events would ensure Ghidorah's eventual return to their reality. Taking Yuko with him, Haruo provokes Godzilla into destroying him and all traces of the living nanometal for the good of the Hota. This prevents Ghidorah from returning as the Hota continue to live alongside Godzilla, treating the kaiju like a natural disaster to be respected and avoided, but not warred with. In a post-credits scene taking place years later, Meina, showing signs of advancing age, watches a group of children conduct a ritual honoring Haruo, placing knotted strings representing their fears into a fire under a wooden effigy of a vulture mech. Even in death, Haruo's story is used as a cautionary tale for future generations. Alright, with some fun facts on Godzilla the Planet Eater. This film marks the first film appearance of King Ghidorah in nearly 2 decades, as he last appeared in 2001's Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All-Out Attack. The character's next on-screen appearance would come only 6 months later in Godzilla King of the Monsters and the Godzilla vs. Evangelion, the real 4D ride at Universal Studios Japan. It is also the first Godzilla film to depict King Ghidorah as a space monster since Godzilla vs. Gigan in 1972.
That's interesting. I mean, for me, I I don't see the distinction between Kaiser Ghidorah in Final Wars and King Ghidorah. I mean, yeah, I guess they're two different things, but for me, it's like that's King Ghidorah. It's a version of Ghidorah, so I don't know. But I mean, I get what they're going with here. But whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. They're kind of taking it their own route.
Yeah.
Godzilla the Planet Eater is only the second Godzilla film to be released in the same year as the previous entry in the series, coming out 6 months after the theatrical versions of Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle. Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster was released theatrically in December of 1964, while Mothra vs. Godzilla was released in April of that same year. So that's your other.
Yeah, which is a fun distinction for the modern era to get two Godzilla movies in 2018. They're weak, but I mean, whatever. It's still interesting. It's cool to see.
We were close, that they weren't in the same year, but only being
Well, I mean,
4 or 5 months apart was
I
minus
think
one in the new Empire.
yeah. They could have been, it could have been a June and December kind of a thing, But yeah, they were within 6 months of each other. So
Godzilla Planet Eater is the final Godzilla film to be released during the political Heisei period, even though it is considered a Reiwa era film.
huh, that's interesting. Yeah. Again, their eras and stuff. Like I don't really it. I understand it, but I don't really, it doesn't really, click for me.
All right, I got two more for you. The Godzilla the Planet Eater is one of the most violent films in the entire Godzilla series, with possibly the most on-screen deaths and the majority of its named characters being killed off by the end. It also features scenes of dismemberment, although a bluish glow is substituted for blood.
Yeah, and like that's one of the aspects of the movie that kind of is the most interesting. Although it's sad that it feels like all of these supporting characters are kind of just strung along for two movies just so they can become cannon fodder in this movie. And I mean, and I'll kind of talk about this trilogy overall a little bit later, but it is some of the better stuff in the movie when Ghidorah just starts wiping everyone out.
Absolutely, I agree with you. It takes a kind of turns up the heat and takes a different tone, so it's nice to see that.
Mm-hmm.
My last one for you is this film is the only film in the series to feature a sex scene, though it is mostly implied and no direct nudity is shown.
Yeah, Haruo gets bug alien action, which is interesting. Or bug people action, which is, and technically, like, they're the closest thing to, like, Mothra fairies that we have in this movie. I know there was an abandoned concept early on with I think the original Mothra, where one of the where the fairies were, I think, going to be another like twice as large as they were. Like instead of 1 foot, they were going to be 2 foot or something. And there was like talks of like a romantic kind of exploration between one of the human male and one of the fairies. And so this feels like another kind of extrapolation of that idea, but instead of like tiny little fairies, these are just kind of short people, and they're bug people and whatever. But it's like, yeah, this is definitely embracing some of like the weirder elements of anime that most people aren't really into. But yeah, he gets bug action, so more power to him.
Yeah, absolutely. That scene threw me for an absolute loop. I was not prepared for that.
Yeah, for a franchise that has had 2 on-screen kisses in the history of the Toho movies, to then get like, he's sleeping with a bug person. It's like, oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, going from a kiss in the last film to that in this film, they took it to the extreme.
Yeah.
That's all I have for fun facts for you on the Planet Eater. I'll get into some quick numbers.
Will do.
This has a 60% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, a 5.1 out of 10 rating on IMDb, A box office of $1.5 million. I could not find the budget. I might have to keep digging for that a little later.
Yeah, and considering that it was produced as one big trilogy, like, you know, I'm sure, anime films in Japan and films overall in Japan don't have very, very high budgets because they're made for a market like Japan that's relatively small. And like, but considering that this trilogy was essentially the same kind of cast, crew, and production throughout, and then just kind of split up, I'm sure that like the costs for the trilogy was kind of amortized across the three entries, sort of like how the Lord of the Rings trilogy had like collectively like a 280 million dollar budget, but when you kind of split that across three movies, it's not, it's like it's better or easier or whatever. So it's like, I'm sure these movies technically like weren't like total busts, because when you consider that it was like one big budget and they had three releases out of it, but like, I'm sure it would be hard to figure out like, well, what's the budget for the first part versus the second part.
Yeah, absolutely. I will go into my favorite soundtrack of the film, and that was called Saludo Rebellion. And that was kind of like almost like a soft rock type of thing. And it just, I found myself jamming to it. I listened to it a couple times, and that was my favorite track of the film. And that sounds like this.
Yeah, so my favorite track in the movie is it's called Farewell, and it's kind of this not really emotional, but it's this kind of soft music that plays when Ghidorah is sort of made physical in the world, and Godzilla is able to actually battle Ghidorah and defeat the three heads of Ghidorah. And it's just kind of like, it's this nice payoff because it's actually a very long extended sequence where Ghidorah is just wrecking Godzilla and absorbing him, and Godzilla's passing through him, and Godzilla can't affect Ghidorah, but Ghidorah is affecting him. And so you finally get this moment where Ghidorah is sort of made material in the physical world, and Godzilla just immediately starts to take him out. And so it's just satisfying, and it's just a really, really nice track. The aesthetics of this anime trilogy, like the visuals are kind of like neat and colorful. The music is always, kind of like unique and engaging and pretty and things like that. It, again, the parts are better, are far, far, far better than the whole.
Absolutely. There are definitely scenes in each movie that I like, but the movies as a whole, clearly I am not the biggest fan.
Quite weak. Yep.
Yeah. But I did have a favorite quote, and it was from Haluelu Doludu, or I don't.
Yeah. Well, let's go.
It was Godzilla is the product of Earth's civilization. You seem to regret this as a mistake, but for me, I commend it as a great achievement. If you were to be faulted, it's the foolishness that you couldn't control Godzilla that was generously born. Think about who this planet currently belongs to. If Godzilla was the name given to the environment's ruler, we humanoids must attain the goal of becoming Godzilla. And I just like that one. It was like a weird quote to me. It's something that you wouldn't hear anyone say in like a live action Godzilla movie or something like that. So
Yeah.
it threw me off.
Yeah, the movies get kind of like philosophical, so to speak, about the whole like Godzilla stuff, and then this one gets like, has this like weird religious death cult, and like they get kind of ponderous, or they ponder about about these kind of concepts, and again, it's interesting and it's kind of unique to talk and think about, but just not terribly sort of engaging or entertaining. Uh, the line that I picked was actually just like a simple line, and it's from Metfees, and he says, "The Great King Ghidorah, the Golden Demise." And like, say what you will about this trilogy or these movies, but that's a pretty hard line to refer to Ghidorah as the Golden Demise. I'm like, well, that's cool. I'm like, that's interesting, And so I just like that line. I like that way of describing King Ghidorah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, in every movie that Ghidorah's been in, he has been a force to be reckoned with. So that I absolutely
And
like that as well.
yeah, and especially in this movie when he's sort of this like interdimensional sort of death being, it's like kind of in some ways like the most like wild version of Ghidorah, because it's this sort of, it's not just a monster, it's like this interdimensional, godlike being. It's just it's this like Lovecraftian kind of like horror kind of monster, and it's a different level. Again, interesting.
All right, Chris, what was your favorite scene in this third film in the trilogy?
Yeah, it was actually when Ghidorah first awakens, and they do this really this really cool thing where now I'm self conscious about every time I say interesting. It's a really cool visual trick where they're showing Ghidorah's shadows on the floor. You're not seeing anything in actuality, and you're seeing Ghidorah's shadows, and like they're passing through people and through people's heads and arms and faces, and then you're seeing those arms get severed and like a chunk taken out of the head, and it's just this really kind of horrifying scene where you can't see Ghidorah, but but Ghidorah is killing these people, and it's so like the character who realizes what's happening. It's like it's a genuinely horrifying moment, and so I like actually like that scene the most, because it kind of seems like one of the moments where it's kind of nailing down exactly what it's going for.
Yeah, and it's a dark scene, you know. I
Yeah,
liked that one. Like I said, there's a couple scenes in each film that I really got into. That was one of them. And then for me it was the like the Ghidorah and Godzilla fight scene. And it was just Ghidorah was kind of just not really pummeling him, but he just kind of like had Godzilla wrapped up and was like just showing his true strength. Like there for a couple minutes of the film, there was nothing that Godzilla could do.
yeah, and it's an epic moment when Ghidorah actually lifts Godzilla off of the ground, and it's and like it just kind of shows like this is the largest Godzilla ever, the biggest and most dense, and even Godzilla seems to move slow under his whole weight, and to see Ghidorah strong enough and powerful enough to elevate him off the ground is also it's a really cool moment.
Yeah, and it just shows that no matter how big he gets, you know, his arch rival is always bigger and has a step up on strength against him.
Yeah, yeah,
Ghidorah always seems to be able to one up him in power, but somehow Godzilla always comes out on top.
definitely.
All right, so on Godzilla the Planet Eater, since this is our fourth film in the Reiwa era, do you want to give me your list for your least favorite to favorite, or would you like me to go first on these first four films?
Oh no, I'll go. I'll go. I'll say City on the Edge of Battle is the worst. I would say the Planet Eater is probably the next best one after that. Planet of the Monsters would probably be the strongest of the three anime trilogy, and then Shin Godzilla is above and beyond all three of those.
I absolutely agree with you there. Our lists are one and the same. I'll get into a little bit on Ghidorah, you know, the monster design. I absolutely loved it. It was different in this third film. I never expected for King Ghidorah to look like that. Just, you know, it's almost like just a bunch of floating heads with like long necks. Like, you know, it was crazy. Like, it was almost like a spirit Ghidorah, you could say.
Yeah, like a demon.
Yep, that's a perfect way to like a spirit demon or something of that sort. But I did like that it was something different. You know, we have the Ghidorah that we've had since the '60s. You know, they updated a little bit with like the horns or teeth or the tails looking a little different. Somewhat they always update it, but this was just a complete spin on the King Ghidorah monster character.
Yeah, and like no full body for King Ghidorah here, just kind of the three snake heads, you know. So that's interesting. Yeah, interesting.
just chuckling over here. Don't mind me
Yeah,
about it.
that is the defining word of these three movies. It's the nice thing to say when it's not really all that good, and I'm not trying to be mean.
No, absolutely not. Because clearly we're Godzilla fans.
Yeah,
We had to watch these films for the podcast,
I want to
even though
like
they're
them.
not our favorite.
I want to like them, and when I get removed from them and I think about them, I'm like, well, they had some stuff going on. They went for some stuff. There's some cool stuff about them. And then when you actually sit down and watch them, you're like, oh yeah, they're actually not very good.
Not at all. But the next film that we are looking at on the podcast and taking a deep dive into, it's probably split between fans now, but I am one of the ones who absolutely loves it. This film in Japan was followed up by Godzilla minus one, but next week we will not be looking at that one. We will be looking at it in like I guess chronological order, you could say, which would be 2019's Godzilla King of the Monsters, which is another film from the MonsterVerse and a film that I absolutely love and had a blast with when I seen it in theaters. So that should be a good time.
Yeah, I adore it. Can I say one last thing about this anime trilogy?
Absolutely.
All right. I honestly think that this is a scenario where if they were going to keep them as three movies, then I would say that each movie should have been edited down to be like barely feature length, like 70 to 75 minutes. And then maybe at least the movies would go by a little quicker, would have a little bit of better pacing. But outside of that, when I watch these three and I think about it, like, what are the main sort of Godzilla moments in the three? In the first one, it's when they blow up the small Godzilla and then the big Godzilla shows up and decimates everyone. In the second one, it's the final battle between Mechagodzilla City and Godzilla, and then in this one, it's your fight between Ghidorah and Godzilla. When I see that, I think, well, this feels like really what this is this is a 2-hour movie that has been stretched out into three different 90-minute movies. You know, when you think about if this were a single 2-hour movie where you have 40 minutes, 40 minutes, 40 minutes, like you should have had 40 minutes of going to the planet and attacking Godzilla and blowing him up and revealing the larger Godzilla. And then 40 minutes to develop this Mechagodzilla City thing and doing this sort of this attack with Godzilla and the nanometal. And then 40 minutes to do the sort of here's Ghidorah, and then this is now Godzilla against Ghidorah, and then and then Godzilla defeats him. Like, to me, this trilogy is defined by being padded out super unnecessarily, you know. And I'm like, this is like, there's enough in here for one really cool 2-hour Godzilla movie where, you know, you blow up the small Godzilla in the first act, you fight him with the nanometal Mechagodzilla in the second act, and then he defeats Ghidorah in the third act. That could have been neat and could have been kind of cool and could have been for like a really cool, fast-paced 2-hour movie. You know, eliminate a lot of the extra characters that are in there and just streamline it. Could have been way cooler than what it was. That's all I'll say.
Absolutely. I mean, for what it is, I can appreciate it. But if you cut all this down to one 2-hour movie with some of the nanometal and some of Ghidorah and all that, this probably would flow really well, and you'd probably have 20-25 minutes of Godzilla out of a 2-hour movie, and we'd probably be much higher on it and much happier.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all right. We will be happy next week when we look at 2019's Godzilla King of the Monsters, because like I said, that film is an epic Hollywood battle. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, that one is giving the people what they want.
Absolutely. Critics, not so much, but who cares about them?
They don't know anything.
But for the anime trilogy, we have done it. We got it. Chris, we don't ever have to talk about it again.
I think we should. I think we should do an anime trilogy special every month.
You find them and bring them to me. We'll see what we can do.
we're gonna watch these movies till we love them, like Stockholm Syndrome.
Is that what I got to do with Godzilla's Revenge too, or All Monsters Attack? I hope not.
Hey, at least Godzilla's Revenge is like barely over an hour long.
Yeah, hour and 10.
It's not a 4.5 hour slog through the mud.
That's all right. We are done. We can move on. We got our rankings and everything in. So, Chris, on this episode for the trilogy, I will say thank you again for joining me. Can't wait to continue this, and I always appreciate it. I always love having you.
Yeah, happy to be here, and this anime trilogy was interesting.
It's one for the books. I will probably not go back to it, but you know what? Like I said, I can appreciate it for the effort, for the attempt at something different.
Yep, they're locked away on Netflix, so you can just pretend they don't exist.
All right, I will get us out of here. Again, thank you, Chris, for joining me. Thanks anyone who's listening, and until next time.